Welcome to Immigration Nation, a podcast that dives deep into the complex and often misunderstood world of United States immigration through interviews with leading U.S. immigration attorneys. This podcast aims to provide a comprehensive overview of the policies, struggles, and victories within the ever-changing world of immigration. Each episode will offer fresh perspectives and valuable insight using real-life stories to navigate our nation's immigration system. If you have an immigration question or an existing case, join us here on Immigration Nation, because this podcast was made for you.
Hi, I'm Gary Davis. I'm an immigration lawyer practicing immigration law in Texas. I've been practicing immigration law for 23 years. And it's an exciting opportunity for me to be here today to share some thoughts with you on immigration and to impart some knowledge that may be helpful to you. So I'm really glad to be here today.
And hello, I'm Scott Berry. I'm one of your hosts at Immigration Nation, and this is a very exciting day for us. We have known Gary Davis since 2016, and it's just an honor to have him in talking about visas today. We're going to talk about visas, and no, not the credit card. We're going to talk about visas. There's so many of them, and Gary is going to kind of bring some clarity to that. How do we simplify something that is a little bit complex? And today we're going to do that, and we're looking forward to a great show.
Doing immigration law as an attorney is very rewarding because it allows me and my firm the opportunity to change people's lives, to bring families together, to break through barriers that the government puts up, making it very difficult for people to navigate through the immigration system. And we're just honored that people trust us enough to give us the opportunity to serve them in that way and to bring value to the world and make the world a better place.
All right, let's learn. Hello, I'm Scott Berry with Immigration Nation. I'll be your host today, and we're here with Gary Davis, who is the founder of Davis & Associates. He is a board-certified immigration attorney. Immigration law is all that Gary works on. His firm is completely dedicated to immigration law. Our goal today is to bring a little bit of clarity when we say, I need a visa or an immigration visa. There's so many visas. Somewhere around the neighborhood of 185 different visas. That's just overwhelming for people. A legal consumer doesn't know what to ask for. And I would think it's even a challenge for some attorneys to try to decipher what's the right visa for what this person is trying to accomplish. Can you shed a little bit of light on, just at a high level, what's an immigration visa? What's it used for?
Absolutely. And thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to having this conversation today. This stuff is super complex, and so anything we can do to help people cut through some of the challenging materials that are out there that talk about these things, and it's so thick and so complex that hopefully in our discussion today I'll be able to share some knowledge and break it down in a way that people can use it and make some good decisions about their options as far as immigration to the U.S.
Excellent. Thank you.
So basically, the first thing I want to talk about, if we can, is the difference between a visa and status. And that maybe is not exactly where Immigration Nation would like us to start, but I feel like it's one of the most difficult and complex issues around this question. And starting with this will give us a foundation that makes it so that the rest of what we discuss is easier to process and understand.
Oh, good.
And so let me start with that. And so basically what happens is a person goes to a U.S. consulate with an application for a visa of some type. And we'll talk about some of the types that are available. And basically, if they are issued the visa, it is stamped in the passport, and they bring themselves and their passport with the visa to the border, whether that's at an airport, at a seaport, at a land port, wherever. They present that visa to the inspecting officer of Customs and Border Protection, or CBP, part of the Department of Homeland Security. And if that officer allows that person in on the visa, they get what's called status at that point. So you may have a situation in which the visa may only be good for a few more days, like a visit visa, for example, that's about to expire. Okay. A person can get on the plane, come to the airport, go through inspection, present the visa, even with a few days left on it, get into the country and get some time period to be in the U.S., generally about 6 months if it's a visit visa, for example.
Okay.
So people get confused about that. Wait a second, my visa is going to expire. And if you're talking to an immigration lawyer, their question is going to be, I don't care about the visa because you're here already. Because again, a visa is just an entry document.
Okay.
What I want to know is, when does your status expire? Because it could be different. The other end is also true. If you have a visit visa, it may be good for 10 years. But when you come through inspection, they may only give you 6 months of status to be in the country. So if a person comes for a consultation and says, I have a visa that's good for 10 years, we're going to say, we don't care about that because you're here already. Because again, visa is just an entry document.
Right. So we know you're in.
That's right. We know you're here. So the visa doesn't matter. It could be expired. It could be good for 10 years. It could be good. It doesn't matter. What matters is your status. And so how long did they give you to be here when you came into the country? The reason that is so significant in this context is because it's easy for people to default to the idea that the visa is all that matters. I can stay here for 10 years because I have a 10-year visa.
No matter what.
No matter what, right? Wrong. That means you can seek the opportunity to come into the country for 10 years. That's what the visa is. So when you get a visa from the consulate, it's going to have some validity duration. You present it at inspection, and the inspecting officer determines how long they're going to let you in and for what purpose based on that visa. So that's one side of the visa, is it's an entry document. The other side is there's lots of different, as you mentioned, almost 200 different categories and subcategories of visa types that are out there. The type of visa is important because that tells the person that holds the visa and the people at inspection what that person can do while they're here. So for example, if they come on a visitor visa, what can they do with that? They can visit, right? If they come on a student visa, what can they do with that? They can go to
study.
school, right?
Yeah.
If they come on some type of work visa, say an H-1B professional work visa, the most common work visa, they can work. Now, what happens if they come on the student visa or the visit visa and they want to work, right? It becomes a problem. So that's why the classification of visa, that's what we call it, is so important. What type of visa the person's coming in on determines what they can do while they're here. And the inspection, not the visa validity period, but the inspection determines how long they can do it for, what that time period is. And that's called status. So we're going to be focusing our discussion today on visa. But the concept of status probably comes up as we talk about changing status or adjusting status.
I had a question about
right?
that. Yeah.
Those kinds of things we'll talk about so that everybody understands the visa and the status, two separate things, and you're limited in duration by the status you get when you come in and the classification of visa that you use to enter.
Yeah. Some people might not even come in the right way.
Right.
And that's their status for that.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you come in without a visa at all, like just illegally, there's a couple of different ways you could do that. One is to just cross the border, Canada or Mexico. Or
it happens.
It happens. That's right, and that's an entry without inspection or an illegal entry, which means the person has no status because they had no visa when they were coming through inspection, but they're here, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
So it's tricky. But then there's also a situation where a person, and we're seeing this a lot lately with what's going on in the world. We've got a crisis in Ukraine, we've got challenges in Central America and the Caribbean, Afghanistan. There's all kinds of issues internationally that we're dealing with, and so there's lots and lots of people coming to the border, which I'm sure everyone's heard about.
Yeah.
However you feel about that politically, one of the options that people have when they're coming in is to talk to someone that patrols the border, right? A Border Patrol officer, a CBP officer, and basically can tell their story. This is why I've come here. This is what I'm facing back home. And there is an opportunity for that inspecting officer to actually let them into the country without a visa, but on what's called parole. Or they could let them in just under what's called release on their own recognizance, where they're just allowed into the country while they pursue perhaps an application for political asylum or something like that. So there's other ways of getting into the country, even legal ways of getting in the country without a visa. But again, for today, we're going to focus mostly on just the visa part.
So when we're talking about visas and status, and now let's start to kind of break it down. There's multiple ways to break it down, right?
There are.
Employment visas, family-related visas, so many different ways. But let's start with immigrant visas and non-immigrant visas. Can we start there?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, so let's take a couple minutes on that. So an immigrant visa is a visa that's issued by the U.S. consulate, and also keep in mind all U.S. consulates are outside of the U.S. There's no U.S. consulates here, so there is no way for someone to get a visa to the U.S. while in the U.S. I'm having to explain that to people all the time. I'm here as a tourist. Can I get a student visa? I could maybe change your status to student, but I couldn't get you a visa, right?
You have to go out of the country.
You got to go out because all U.S. consulates, which is the only place to get a visa currently to the U.S., you have to leave the country and go to the U.S. consulate to get one, right?
Okay.
So an immigrant visa is basically for lack of a better term, a permanent visa. Its validity period is generally 6 months, but when a person enters the U.S. on an immigrant visa, if within that 6-month validity period, they become permanent residents. People think of permanent residence as a green card, right? Colloquially, we talk about it as a green card. And that's a fine word to use or phrase to use. But really, it's an immigrant visa that a person has obtained from outside the U.S. They come to the inspection, present it to the officer. When they come into the country, they are granted permanent residence off of the immigrant visa. So it is permanent residence or a green card visa, for lack of a better term. So basically, think of it as a green card visa. It's the visa that you get, whether it's through family sponsorship, employment sponsorship, investment, whatever the path to get it. When you come into the country, you become a permanent resident through that immigrant visa.
Okay. Well, is there a path for someone on a non-immigrant visa to ever get a green card?
Yeah, there are lots of different ways, actually. It's numerous, but to just make it clear on what the non-immigrant visa is, a non-immigrant visa is the opposite of that, right? So it's a visa that someone uses to come into the country for a temporary purpose. So whether that's a work visa, a student visa, a visit visa,
I was gonna say visit,
those kinds of things are all non-immigrant visas, meaning that they're not ones that generate on their own permanent legal status. The immigrant visa is permanent legal status. The non-immigrant visa is temporary. So you're going to have
So there wasn't an
status period.
intention at the time for that non-immigrant visa holder to become permanent.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, there are paths to do that, but at the time of getting the visa and at the time of the inspection, one of the legal requirements is that the person prove to the adjudicating officer, whatever officer, consular officer, whoever, even the inspectors at the airports or whatever, customs inspectors, right?
Yeah.
Those guys are having to make a determination about the person's intention. And if the person does not satisfy them that their intention is to stay on a temporary basis, a pure non-immigrant, as opposed to an immigrant who wants to stay permanently, then they could refuse entry or deny the visa. That's a possibility. So yeah, the non-immigrant visas, there are a couple of exceptions, but generally, non-immigrant visas are designed for temporary visits to the U.S. for the purpose that is allowed under the visa classification, like we talked about earlier. Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, when someone comes into the country on a visa, they come on a certain visa type, which limits what they're authorized to do while they're here. Like I said, if you come as an F1 student, you get to be a student. That's just about it. And so the question frequently comes, what do I do to have an opportunity to do something different, right? So when someone's come into the country legally and they've been maintaining status, and there's several different ways that they can adjust their status to become a permanent resident. You don't necessarily have to go get an immigrant visa from the consulate. You can adjust your status and get a green card from here.
Without having to leave.
Without having to leave. That's called adjustment of status. Or let's say as a person's graduating from school, having come in as an F1 student, they can change to a different visa type, like a work visa, for example. H-1B is the most common. And so anyway, you can change status to a different status so that you have the opportunity for another time duration and a different set of options of things you can do while you're here, or potentially, with the right circumstance, adjust status and become a permanent resident while you're here in the U.S.
So it'd be pretty easy to visualize that someone could come with the intention of studying and going back, but for whatever reason, change their mind. They could fall in love.
That happens a lot, yes.
They could do really well in school,
Right.
and during the University Career Center meet some amazing companies
Right.
that want to hire them
Yes.
and are trying to convince them to stay.
Exactly.
Okay.
Or they go on to professional athletics, or they have an opportunity to go into business for themselves, or they have a call to the ministry and they decide they want to go work for their church. There's all kinds of visa types, and they can switch out of that other, whatever they came in on, and switch over to a different classification through a change of status process. that would allow them to change what they are authorized to do while they're here in the U.S. and what the time period is within which they can do that.
That probably happens more often than you would think.
It happens very, very frequently, and my experience is that the government doesn't really get bothered by that. I mean,
Right.
they make money from it.
Yeah.
They have a process around it, and so it's just something that's kind of in the normal course of providing an immigration, policy and pathways through the government. It's just the immigration lawyer's job to figure out which one fits the best for that individual that's come in to say, hey, I'm about to graduate from school. What are my options? Our job is to make sure that they know which of the many visa options there are would
Right.
potentially be applicable to them.
Because not getting it right could delay the entire
Well, yeah, when
experience.
you
right?
consider time horizons for government processing on things, I mean, people have to realize it's only one source in the U.S. to go to get this stuff processed. It's the U.S. government.
Yeah.
And so long time horizons sometimes on these things, you've got to get it right, from the beginning
Yeah.
so that you have maximum chances of getting the result that you want.
Good point.
Yeah.
So, so out of all of those kind of visas, clearly some of them get used
Exactly.
more often than others. So
That's right.
We can't cover them all.
Sure.
But it would be nice to be familiar with the ones that get applied for the most.
Yeah.
Can we pick a handful
Yeah,
of them
absolutely.
and talk about them?
Yeah, I'll give you a quick snippet on a few. We talked about the F1 student visa as our kind of example case because that's very common. Get accepted to a school, go to the consulate, get the visa, come to the U.S., study. There's even some work authorization opportunities through the F1 status, so it's a really, really good visa type that people frequently choose. The H-1B work visa I've also mentioned, and that's basically a professional worker visa. So a company can sponsor someone to come in and work for them in a professional job, one that requires a specific 4-year or higher degree, usually engineering, technology, sometimes teaching, those kinds of things that require education. It's an H-1B work visa. There's also a couple of others that come up frequently. An L-1 visa is for an international transfer of an executive or a manager or someone with specialized knowledge. So there's a company outside the U.S. that has an office here, or I guess you could say it the other way. It has a U.S. company that has an office outside the U.S.
Okay.
They work for that company outside the U.S. or the office for a year, and they can potentially transfer to the U.S. office if it's in a managerial, executive, or specialized knowledge capacity for the company. So that's an L visa.
Yeah, it seems like that would be fairly common as well.
It's
right?
very common, but it's hard for smaller business.
Well, I was thinking more like Toyota,
Exactly.
Frito-Lay,
That-
Google,
that's what it
Facebook.
was built for, is like Amazon, ExxonMobil,
Right.
Walmart, companies like this that have big international
already
presences.
global.
Exactly. So they want to bring their maybe director level plus type
Right.
positions.
They got
some
a superstar. That's
outside,
it.
bringing them in. That's an L1A, okay?
Okay.
And it works great. It's a really, really good visa, but in the right situation. That's the intercompany transfer, L visa. E2 is incredibly common. The E2 visa is an international investor visa. There's also E1, which is for trade, but E2 is the more common of the E visas because it's just for investment. It's basically somebody wants to own their own business here, and they have some money to invest in the business, then they can come to the U.S. as an E2 investor to run their business.
Now, I know you have a pretty good bit about
We do.
that, because we've talked about that
Yeah,
before. The
yeah, we
types
do a lot
of
of E2s.
businesses that people
Exactly, and,
like
and
to
it,
come
it
over.
spans the spectrum of business options. You can do franchises, you can do hospitality, you can do pretty much anything that has some substantial investment of capital to get it started. I have a lot of guys that do like car sales and
All right.
alcohol
Restaurants and
sales,
stuff.
restaurants, franchises of all kinds. So it's really, really flexible. But it only applies to people that come from countries with which the U.S. has a treaty that allows for that kind of bilateral investment exchange.
Okay.
So there's a list that you can find at the State Department's website that maps out all of the countries that have the treaty that is permitted. Countries that we do most frequently are Colombia, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Jordan, Canada, and then a lot of the Western European countries, France, UK, Netherlands, places like that.
The government limits, like how many overall visas that can be given
Yeah.
in a year, and how many people can, immigrants that can come over.
They do in some categories, not all. The most notable of those is the H-1B that I mentioned earlier. Believe it or not, despite the fact that our economy is as large as it is, there's only 85,000 H-1B visas available every year. 85,000, woefully insufficient relative to demand.
Yeah.
Last year, I don't know what the number was this year. I don't know that it's been reported yet because we just barely ran the lottery that they run to
Yep.
allocate those visas. But last year it was close to 500,000 people, or
Vying for
500,000
those
submissions
spots.
vying for those 85,000 spots. Yeah.
We definitely need to talk about the H-1B.
Oh my goodness. Yeah,
in
it's
own
thick.
session because it deserves an explanation.
It's a big topic, and when you add in the exception to the cap, which is that you can work for some qualified nonprofit institutions like universities, for example. Universities, last statistic that I saw, and I'm sure somebody out there will correct me, but the last one I saw was about 170,000 H-1Bs to universities and other nonprofits because there's no cap,
Okay.
and 85,000 cap subject, which would be for private companies and that kind of thing. So it almost doubles the size of, well, I guess it triples the number of H-1Bs actually issued, but 2/3 of those are from nonprofit organizations, not from private industry.
Is that probably professors?
Usually professors,
Yeah.
exactly, or other high-level administrators in university setting, that kind of thing.
True.
Yeah. One last one that I'll mention, and then we can tie this off, is the R1 visa, and that is for religious work. So if someone's ordained to ministry or has some other level of authority within a religious organization, they could potentially be sponsored for ministry-type duties here in the U.S. through the R1 visa. So those are some of the most common ones that we see.
You know, we seriously could have, like, we could talk about this forever.
Oh, yeah. There's
You
no
know,
there's no
just-
limit. Yeah.
And there's a lack of understanding
Yeah.
to a legal consumer because how could you absorb all this information?
Yeah, you can't.
it's just-
Somebody ought to write Immigration for Dummies, frankly, because it might be kind of nice to have a reference book
No kidding.
where people could flip through and have like a flow, a yes/no kind of flow diagram to help people kind of figure out what visa types may be options, and then take them through each one and
Right.
explain what they are and how to qualify for them. It could be a whole series.
That's it. We're writing that book.
Right? No, seriously. I've thought about it.
Okay, so now this is a trick question, right? Because there's so many different types of visas, but somehow try to find a way to talk about, like, what is the process of obtaining a visa? Is there any way to talk about that in general
There are
terms?
some commonalities between types, but each type has its own little bit of uniqueness, right? So to give you an example, we've talked about F1 and H-1B, F1 students, H-1B professional workers. So we'll stick with that because they're
Okay.
two examples of ways that it's processed a little bit differently. With an F1 student, I think I mentioned this before, but basically you get accepted by the school, they give you the documentation you need, you apply for the visa at the consulate, they give you the visa, hopefully, and then you use the visa to come to the U.S. and go to school. That's it. That's the whole process. The application's online. Frankly, you don't really need lawyers. You just fill it out online, get an appointment at the consulate, show your acceptance letter, and then they either give you the visa or they don't. Okay?
So good point.
Pretty straightforward. On the H-1B side, however, H-1B and there are other types like the L that I mentioned earlier, the R, that you have to have a petition approved from a sponsor, like an employer or a
Right.
church, to be able to apply for the visa. So in other words, you get the petition approved from here, you take the approved petition to the consulate, and then it's very similar to the F1. You go online, you file a visa application, pick the category of visa that you're asking for, and then you show them that you've got the petition approved and that you otherwise qualify for the visa. They issue the visa, you come to the U.S. to start the job. So the application itself is very similar regardless of the visa type. The difference is going to be whether or not you have to have an approval from the U.S. government from here, that's called a petition, or if you can just go with some other documents like from the school without dealing with the government at all and go straight to the consulate with the visa application.
So there could be different forms.
So actually, what's interesting about that is to get the petitions, those forms are different than the visa application. But regardless of what visa you're applying for, at least on the non-immigrant side, it's all the same form. It's just you select a different category of visa, kind of in a drop-down at the government's website, depending on which visa type you want to try to get.
So I'm assuming one or two checks in the wrong spot.
Could be a real problem. The one where people get tripped up a lot, and this usually happens because they've hired someone that's local to the consulate that claims to be, have special access to the government or whatever,
May not be an attorney.
Generally not.
Not generally not. Okay.
Right. And, different levels of actual honesty about, what they're actually doing. Putting down whether or not you're married and putting down whether or not you have kids. The temptation for these service providers or even for individuals applying on their own is to put down a spouse or a child that you may be leaving behind to get past that issue that we talked about earlier. You remember the consulates are by law required to assume you're coming to stay permanently until you prove otherwise. Well, having a spouse and a child that you're leaving behind, even if those people don't exist, is very tempting to put that on there because they believe that it will improve chances of getting the visa.
Right.
Whether that's true or not, it's anyone's guess. I mean, there's such heavy consequences from that. When you get here, now you've told the government you're married, you get married to someone else, try to file for a green card, that's going to come back up.
Yeah.
And then you can say, well, I paid this guy to file it for me. I didn't know what was in there. Sorry, you're an adult.
Right.
They're not going to give you a pass on that, right? So yes, there are certain places on that application where if you don't get it exactly right, or you believe by giving, an answer that deviates from, that distracts them from getting the real information or whatever your motivation is, that they don't throw those things in the garbage after they issue the visa. They're all still out there with all those answers to those questions. And so you got to be very, very careful to be accurate with those application disclosures. And you got to make sure that you set it up correctly to accomplish what you want to accomplish, right? Because if you drop down and click the wrong visa type, they're going to refuse that visa because you picked the wrong one.
Yeah, now you got another
There's no
6
fixing
months,
it.
another
Exactly
8
right.
months.
There's other consequences like that.
And it takes a long time anyway.
It does, depending on the visa type. There's some where we're seeing 2025, appointment times at the consulates for like visit visas and stuff. Since COVID, it's been a big mess.
That's just the appointment.
Just the appointment to try to get the visa.
2 years.
Yeah. For some visa types and some consulates that are more heavy, those kinds of things.
No need to blame your immigration attorney for that.
That is correct. Well, with one exception. If your attorney did not warn you that was a possibility and you were expecting it to be a few weeks,
upset about that.
Okay, you could be upset about them not bothering to tell you it was going to take a long time to get scheduled. Wow. But we don't, obviously attorneys don't control the government, right? We know how to access the system. We have, those of us that do good work, we have a good reputation with those guys, and they appreciate what we do because it kind of makes their job easier when we do a good job on our end, and everybody's happy, right? Everybody wins. And so in that sense, we've got some influence in some aspects, but no control.
Right. It's not your system.
No, it's not our system. We just help our clients access it in the most efficient way possible with the highest chances for success.
You mentioned earlier about the ability to work on certain visas and stuff like that. Obviously, all the visas don't come with work rights.
That is correct.
Correct? All right.
Yeah, visit visas, you don't have work authorization, although it's a little gray because you can do business. So if you're here, if you're here for like a sales meeting or something with your company, you're kind of doing business, but you're not like an employee, right? So there is some gray in there, like on a B1 business visitor where you can, check on clients or you can even make sales calls.
You can't go open a company, though.
But you could open a company, but you can't really run it day to day, right? You'd have to have a manager or a partner or somebody to kind of run the day to day. So there's definitely some gray, but yeah, to answer your question, there's some that are here that you have to be working to be legal. There's some that you can't be working to stay legal. And so, having good advice on where your limits are and what kinds of things are appropriate within the bounds of the law, that's the kind of thing that attorneys like us are about, is trying to help people navigate through that and understand it.
It seems pretty obvious at this point that there's massive benefits to someone speaking to an immigration attorney before you launch off into this and either fail or make something last 2, 3, 4 years and you suffer, right? So we're going to talk in a separate episode about consultations so that they get good advice before they jump in. So so clarify this for me. Not all visas, when people are applying for visas, they don't all get accepted, right? Some get denied.
Correct.
How's that work?
So it depends on where you are in the process. As I mentioned before, there are some visas that require a petition. So it could be that the petition itself is not successful, like for an H-1B work visa that has to be approved from here before you can go to the consulate with your application.
Very early on.
Then it's not going to work because it just says get approved. But let's say that that's been approved or otherwise you don't need it. when you go to the consulate, it just depends on, the consulate's got to be satisfied that you're actually going to go do what you say you're going to go do. You're going to take that job on the H-1B, for example. You're going to actually attend the school. Sometimes they'll call the school and say, do you know this person? Did you really accept them? These documents legitimate? So there's got to be legitimacy to the application and your intentions. In some situations, most, they've got to be satisfied that there's something about your life in your country that is drawing you back. So whether it's real estate that you own, family ties that you're leaving behind, maybe some money or whatever, just a job opportunity, something that satisfies them that you've got sufficient motivation that you're not just going to come here and then overstay or stay beyond your time. They got to be satisfied you're going to come back at the end of your stay. And so there's that part of it. If it's education based, like for the H-1B, you got to have certain level of education. They may check into that to make sure that it's legitimate, and those kinds of things. So legitimacy, and then they also check background. So they're going to want to know that you're a good person. They want to know that you're not somebody that's been involved in terrorism or that has a criminal record that you're not disclosing, or has been to the U.S. before and violated status in the past, overstayed or something. Drug use is one. Any kind of security or background kind of issue, they're going to check into all that before they issue the visa. Exactly.
So they could deny you.
They can.
If they deny you, is it all is lost, or you can appeal?
It just depends on the justification for the denial. Okay, so if it's denied and they say we find you to be a terrorist, you have to apply again and provide evidence that they got the wrong guy.
Right.
Right. You got to be able to show them that you can overcome whatever they had in their system that showed you to have been engaged in terrorist activity.
That's not me.
That's right. It's not me. It was my cousin, or it was somebody else.
Right,
you got to prove
name.
it's not me. Right.
Yeah.
So that's that one. If it's more background related, like a deportation in the past, and they refuse it, then we may have to get a waiver or some way to pardon that history so that the person becomes eligible for the visa. If it's fraud, then we have to try to show them that the fraud was innocent, or that they were not aware that there was any fraud in this thing, or that approach.
They're a victim.
That they're a victim in this whole thing, or that there's a waiver available. There is a waiver section for non-immigrant visas, and a waiver, you can think of it kind of like as a pardon, and it's like a forgiveness for that history. And so they could potentially qualify for a waiver as well in the right justification for the objection to the application.
There's another section we could talk about waivers.
Oh, waivers! Yeah, it's a whole day.
We're doing it. Write this down. Somebody write this down.
Right.
Okay, so let's wrap it up with you. Just share with our listeners anything else that you think they should know. It might be a most common myth. It may be something you really want them to leave with the understanding of these one or 2 points.
Yeah.
All right.
So I would say one thing that I can share with the audience is one of the most common questions that I get in a consultation is, what are my options? And the options that you have are limited by an archaic statute that does not reflect current realities. And the fact that you are driven, motivated, and want something and feel like you have something to bring by itself is not enough.
Oh, man.
Right? We have to make it fit into one of these categories that we've been talking about. Whether it's an E2 investor visa, you got to fit into it. You got to take your idea, your drive, your motivation, and
meet the
and
requirements.
gel it to make it fit the requirements. You may have to rethink your business plan or whatever. With a student, you're going to have to set aside your desire to come here and take over the world.
Right.
And focus on your studies as what your primary motivation is for seeking the visa, because if they detect that your long-term plan is to stay in the U.S., you may not get the visa, right? So just because you have a desire and the motivation and the drive and maybe even the qualifications
or the need
or whatever to bring tremendous value to the country does not by itself qualify you for a visa. You've got to fit into these very rigid requirements for each classification and get over that non-immigrant, immigrant, issue that we were talking about earlier. Satisfy them that you're really planning to come on a temporary basis to be able to have a chance to get the visa. We got to make it fit. And sometimes that's really hard, and people don't want to accept that
Right.
because they know that they're successful in their country, or they know the kind of value they can bring
They're
to the
being
United
honest.
States. They are. That's
Yeah,
right.
They're trying to do it the
That's
legal
right.
way,
And
the
they
right
think
way.
because I know the value that I can bring, I'm a nurse, or I'm a doctor, or I'm a first responder by profession. I've got a law degree, and I want to change the world in terms of law. All of that is great.
Right.
But we can only take what you have and then try to squeeze it through
Yeah.
the funnel of
rigid
one of these
system.
options, a very rigid system. And you may have to be willing to be open-minded about what you're hoping to accomplish. And you may have to rethink and reframe what you want to do with the next phase of your life by coming to the U.S. to make it fit with the options that are available. There's no custom option. There's no all other when it
Right.
comes to visas. You either fit one of the categories or you don't.
It's not super subjective.
That's right.
Right.
There's a lot of objectivity
Right.
in terms of the requirements, but then it gets worse because when you're going to talk to the officer or you submit a petition or whatever, an application for a visa, that analysis is subjective.
Yeah.
So even though we're stuck with these rigid, in some cases very draconian and
Yeah.
silly, frankly, looking at current times, requirements on the objective side, we got to meet all those. You got to check those boxes first.
Right.
But then you also have to be prepared to deal with the subjective
And
analysis.
that's another whole,
It is.
again, another whole
It is.
discussion.
And
We
there's-
really need to talk about that because
That's right.
it shouldn't, but it could depend on who you get.
No, it's not about that. It absolutely does depend on who you get. And that's where the lawyers, again, can bring some value. It takes some experience. You got to have some exposure to presenting applications to these guys so that you get a feel for where their lines are, right?
Yeah.
And then you start over time to refine your understanding of what generally is accepted over there based on just the volume of filings and the feedback that you get, right?
Yes.
So that's why using an experienced attorney can help you, analyze your presentation from the beginning to help you understand what your actual chances are of being successful with the approach.
Because you need every extra 5% chance of
Sometimes that's
winning.
all it takes.
10, it's going to matter.
That's right.
Yeah. Gary, thank you so much.
Absolutely,
for
it's my
being
pleasure.
with us. And we're definitely going to do this more.
Good.
All right, we'll do it several more times. Gary Davis, founder of Davis and Associates, based primarily out of Dallas and Houston, but serving legal consumers across the United States. Have a great day.
This podcast has been prepared for general information purposes only and is not legal advice. This information is not intended to create, and receipt of it does not constitute an attorney-client relationship.